So, hi everyone. Um, Basically, I work for a nonprofit based out of Tbilisi. We're a small data communications organization, and really what that translates into is we shed light on issues of social importance, and we delve into these issues using data analysis, and we then translate that data, the stories that the data tells, into a variety of stories that we hope we try to bridge the gap between their complexity and a language that people can understand. And usually that takes the form of visualizations. But we've also started diving into radio as well. So basically your sort of daily dose of data on the radio or your podcast or whatever medium you use to listen to information when you can't see it. For example, when you're walking to work or when you're driving, things like that. So in many ways, we're a data journalism organization as well. We dive into a lot of the issues in Tbilisi, in Georgia, but also in other countries as well. We work with other organizations that are interested in issues, are interested in knowing more about issues through data, and then are interested in communicating that to people in a way that they're interested in a way that they can understand, and in a way that engages them to take some form of action. And in many ways, this is a lot of advocacy work. So what does that mean? So this is basically more or less a catalog of the stories that we do. And you can see here that a lot of these are visual. We do infographics, interactive visualizations, animations, factographs, comics, GIFs, whatever format basically is actually going to get people to want to be interested in an issue and get people interested in the data itself. Though we often try to hide the data in the message, the message is always based on what the data says. So we're not a PR organization. We're really at heart an organization that just sheds light on important issues through data, and then communicates that to audiences in a way that's going to make them want to do something, to get involved. So being in Georgia, though, has a lot of obstacles. There's not a lot of money. So this type of work is very difficult because the people that need it the most don't have the money to pay for it, which is interesting. There are a lot of TV organizations that want this work, and they have the profits through advertising to pay for it. But the people that are on the ground making change, they often don't. For example, women's rights organizations, organizations that take a look at violence against women, organizations that try to shed light on the behavior of society towards LGBT communities, economics issues, the impact of the Georgian lari, which is the local currency, devaluation over time, and what the impact on the most vulnerable segments of society, the poor, for example, that earn money in lari, but have to pay loans on their houses tied to a dollar amount. I don't know if you're familiar with over the last, starting in September 2014, the law and continuing for the next year, the lari decreased in value to the dollar by half, right? So people that earned, let's say 800 lari, which is above the average income in the country, were having to pay back loans, but they were actually, they were having to pay back twice as much as they were before. These types of stories, they have an impact. But understanding them is quite complicated for a lot of organizations. And so we delve into these stories and we try to get our hands dirty with the data and then translate that to users. But funding is an issue, and the technology that we use to do this reflects that, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is how we do what we do given the fact that we basically make no profit, right? How are we an organization that uses technology, data analysis and data communication basically with no profit? And what tools do we use? How do we use them? And how do we create sustainable approaches to these problems? Because these stories, they can also happen quite quickly. I often when I compare what JumpStart does, what we do, to the type of media department or graphics department that you would find, let's say, at the New York Times. Except the New York Times has tens of people working on graphics and design, from web development, data analysis, to video and animation. They have huge departments. And we're a team of basically 12 people. We're three, I actually have a picture. If I can pull this up. That's our team. This is, so we're a small team, but yet we use technology I think quite well to tackle these issues. Let me give you an example of some of the things we do and how we've done them, and I'll give you an idea of what I'm talking about first, and then I'll start to go back into the technology that we use. Yeah. So we have 3 designers, 3 developers, and 2 full-time, one full-time journalist / researcher, and another full-time sociologist and urban geographer and researcher. We also have a full-time communications coordinator. And I myself do program, but as director, I don't do that as often as I probably would want to. Directing is a lot more complicated than programming, apparently. So here's an example of a story. I mentioned the Laurie devaluation. Actually, so we have to as just like a news organization like the New York Times, the Guardian, the Washington Post. JumpStart has to respond to issues quite quickly with technology, right? When the Laurie first started to devaluate, we need to talk to people about what that meant and why that mattered to them. Because if you can't communicate data in a way that answers the question, why should you care about this? Then there's no point, because nobody's going to be interested in the story. Nobody's going to take anything away from the story or find something useful that speaks to them. As part of storytelling is really, it's talking about the issue, the full range of the issue. And as if any of you are journalists or have dabbled in journalism, one of the fundamentals is to answer the questions of the who, what, why, when, where, and how of an issue. What is the story? And the data is supposed to help you do that. But a story is something that happens fast. So you need to take data, use it to answer these questions, and then develop the packaging around that information that's going to speak to people. And you need to do that very quickly. How do you do that? I mean, this is not like we have some months, let's develop a new feature for our super platform that everyone is paying money to get. No, this is something where, it's happening now. We have to talk, we have to tell the story now. So let's see if I can. But the evolution of these stories, of this particular story, I think shines a light on exactly how we work and how we use technology to talk about these issues. So back in 2014, Ivanishvili, the then Prime Minister of Georgia, basically said that the lorry was strong and adequate, and he actually used the word adequate, and we tried to define what that meant, what he meant by that, and nobody could. What does it mean to have a currency that's adequate? That's an interesting question. But what we did do was respond because the data was telling us a completely different story than what the prime minister and what politicians were saying about the lorry, which was that the lorry was strong. The lorry was not strong. The lorry was devaluing against the dollar very rapidly. And people were starting to lose their homes because they couldn't pay their mortgages. They couldn't pay the loans that they had taken out for their houses because banks tie loans to dollar amounts. So you don't pay, for example, let's say the average Georgian income is between 400 and 800 lari a month, right? So that translates to between 200 and 400 today, $200 and $400 a month, right? That's not a lot of money, is it? No. But imagine, you're a good planner. You sit down, you say, I earn, let's say, $400 a month. I can pay on a loan $100 a month for sure, right? So you're a very, budget-oriented person. You create a spreadsheet or you write it down in your notebook and you say, we have this much money on food, this much money on utilities, this much money on loan. And then all of a sudden you realize and your loan then is $100 a month. Right? So you make 800 lari, so that's 200 lari a month. But the bank sees it as $100 a month. And so all of a sudden, $100 doesn't mean 200 lari, it means 400 lari. And what does that mean? That means now half your income is now being, you're having to use half your income now on paying your mortgage and not 1/4. So that's a big deal. So we started with a comic, right? And the technology we use is pretty straightforward. We use design tools. I've encouraged our staff to use Inkscape and open source technologies, but they do use the industry standard. They use Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, Audition and After Effects. They use the whole Adobe Creative Suite, which is fine. That's the industry standard. And okay, I'm an open source advocate, but they're the ones doing it, and I'm okay with that. But then our team was like, well, this is not enough. Because people don't really understand what's happening to them. So how do we create a tool very quickly that allows people to enter in how much money they're paying, or they were paying, and it'll tell them how much they're paying now and how much money they've lost. Well, first of all, this is a pretty sad type of application, right? You're basically telling people how much they're being screwed. But this is the story, right? And so this is the story we need to tell. So go back. So our coders, oops, there we go. So our coders, and keep in mind, like, all of let's see what's going on. Okay, I'm not sure. So anyway, you can see what's going on here. So our coders, all the people who work on our staff, whether they be designers or programmers or data analysts, they're first and foremost storytellers, which is interesting, right? Sometimes you see many companies that put the coders in the basement, which is another interesting story for JumpStart, because one of the reasons you might ask is, how do we get such talented people working for JumpStart when we can only pay local nonprofit salaries? And the answer to that is, we don't put people in the basement. We work as a team, and the problems we solve, while they're technical in implementation, are about the story themselves. And so we focus on the story, and we as a team brainstorm on how we can use technology to solve these communications problems. And we see them as like communications problems first and foremost. What is the story and how do we tell it? And then we use technology to approach that in what we think are creative ways that most local, and local I mean whole South Caucasus, but also in Europe we're finding they don't think about things this way, and which makes us really unique. You know, you have a diverse team with diverse backgrounds with technical skill sets, and when you put a problem in front of them, they solve it very differently than you would your standard NGO. And this is actually a great opportunity. This is where JumpStart shines, and this is why the work we're doing is so important. So what we did really quickly was just with some JavaScript and design, nothing fancy, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, no more than that, is we created a tool that allows people to enter in their amounts. Let's see if I can actually get it to... Let's see what's going on. Okay, I don't know why it's not doing that, but so you enter in your amount, and basically it tells you a very sad story. It tells you how much money you've lost by doing absolutely nothing. And also tells people that they're not going to be able to keep their house. Basically, this calculator was hugely popular. It reached and touched a lot of people, but in the most sad way. Basically, it told people, like, what is the situation regarding the lari devaluation for people just like you? It talked to people very personally. And that's one of the secrets to a good story, is that it describes the whole story, puts it in context, but then speaks to people on a level that they can understand. And we can use technology to do that. But then our team started to geek out around the issue of how do we take that to the next level? Because one of the things we're finding is that when we're looking at lari exchange rates, we found that all the data was distributed across the web in a variety of locations, and it was very hard for people to actually make decisions, better decisions, about, you know, today, where should I exchange? I have this money, where should I exchange it? Or how has it changed over this period? And so what we did was we started to write scrapers. Okay. Now I'm getting a little bothered. So we started to write scrapers. Right? Does anyone here know what a web scraper is? No? So basically it's some code, some script that you can write that goes out to a web page and grabs information off of it and then stores it somewhere. And that's really all it does.
Crawler?
It's just like a crawler. A crawler is a scraper. It's just another word for it. It's a web crawler. So what we did was we found the source of all this data that was distributed over the web in banks, financial institutions, government agencies, and we wrote scrapers that go out there every day, actually many times a day, goes out, grabs all this data, packages it, and stores it into a database. And it just does that automatically every day. And if somebody changes a website and it doesn't work, we just get an email and we update it. So that part, we collect data. So the first stage, collecting data, finding the data. The next part is now we decided how we wanted to analyze this, how we wanted to present it to our audience, and now we needed to communicate that to our audience. And so we created this, and fortunately due to the resolution of the projector, and I don't feel like sitting and fixing that right now, so it's a little bit wrapped for a smaller device, but that's okay. We created tools that allow people to see how much it costs to buy and sell from a variety of sources. And we can see here in the middle, the national bank exchange rate, and then the difference for private institutions such as TBC Bank or Bank Republic or Bank of Georgia even. You can change the currency that you're interested in. You can choose which banks you're interested in comparing. You can see how much it costs to buy, to sell. And you can choose the period over which you're interested in. And then you can export the data using into a variety of formats, including vector format, pings, etc.
About the currencies, is there Bitcoins in it?
There is not, but there should be. We're working on that. There is one organization that's developing in Georgia the Bitcoin services, and we're going to try to get the data from them in a regular fashion. So then there's also the rates. We also included the depreciation calculator. Let's see. Okay, which is what we had before. So we kept the tool, the sad storytelling tool, but then we added also a converter that allows people to choose which financial institution has the best rates of the day. So instead of, we use technology to make the decision making easier for people. So we did that. And then we also added, because we could, an API. It uses itself, the API, so we just opened it up. But basically what that does is allow people to create other applications on top of this tool that we used. And it turns out people are doing that. People are creating Android applications for currency exchange rates in Georgia for Georgians. And something we didn't have the money to do, but we did have the money to open up the API, and we did that, and now people are making money off this tool, and we've created a sort of medium sort of middleware between the data that is distributed all over and an application that somebody can make money off of. Why didn't we do that? I don't know. We should have. but we didn't, because we didn't have time, because we were too busy telling other stories. So I use this example from the comic to the simple JavaScript tool to this to explain sort of an evolution, but also how we can use technology to make a difference. Because people are using this. Banks are now calling us and asking us how we can help them do this work, and we're like, we're storytellers, man. But we're helping them. We're consulting with people to help them improve how they communicate to their customers with complex financial information. So actually designing books and informational pamphlets, which not really our job, but they're paying for it, and we use that money then to do more stories. So it's helping us out quite a lot. So how do we build the Lawyer Explorer? Well, the Lawyer Explorer was built using Ruby on Rails, and that's kind of what we use in our organization is Ruby on Rails. Why did we choose that? Because when we first started doing this type of work, our developer used Ruby on Rails and knew Ruby. That's why. And why do we use one thing over another? Oftentimes it's circumstantial. But one thing we did do, which was important in the process, let's see if I can. Is if I can get this work. All right. Is we use what's called a starter template. This might seem for many of you. Who here knows what a web application is or a web framework is? Yeah. So what web frameworks do you guys use? Django. Okay. Okay. What's that? Node.js. Okay. Any others? Okay. Java. All right. So we're actually considering switching to Node for a number of reasons. But right now, as an organization, we have a system, and that system helps us speed up things. So we don't just change on the fly, but we have discussions about the technologies we use and make it very deliberate. We don't just hire somebody and say, okay, you know PHP, just do it in PHP. We don't do that. We say, we're a Ruby on Rails right now organization, and we're going to stick with that. It really simplifies things in the long run, even though that there's a learning curve up front. This is really important for us because when we have to design something, like for example, we did the Lari calculator in a week and a half. We built that API and all in a week and a half, from design to publication of the story. How do we do that fast? Well, we spent time up front creating a Rails bootstrapping framework for us. So we took Rails and all the gems that we use in almost every application, and we created our starter template. And basically that includes all the multilingual components that we use in Rails. If any of you are interested, I mean, it's what everyone uses, it's globalized. But everything we use, it's the same, recurring, authentication, everything is all wrapped up in this starter template that we use. And basically we can hit the ground running right away and get something done within a day, actually. And we've done that. We've gotten an application up and running in a day that needed to go live right away. And we couldn't do that otherwise without having spent a number of weeks actually setting this up properly. In addition to just the overall template, built into the template is also the deployment technology. So we used to use Capistrano, which allows us to deploy to multiple servers when needed. So we work with a lot of partners, but we also need this internally, is we need to do a test version before we get ready to deploy it live. So we used to use Capistrano, now we use Mina to do that. It's a smaller footprint. And really it's very systematic. We just change a few configuration settings for the application, and then bam, we have a development version up and running on our test server that we can work with our partners in literally a few hours of hitting the ground running once we have a concept. Then when we're ready, we can deploy it live. Same thing, if we need to update it, we can do it on the dev server really quick. Share it, make sure we're all happy with it, make sure it's working properly, test it, and then push it out to the live server right away. So this is oftentimes these are very iterative processes. We need to do this very quickly. Stories are happening right now. We need to get out the door, and this is one way we've done that. And then on the server, if many of you are interested, we do use Nginx. It's light, it's fast, it works for us. We're happy with it. We use Puma as the application server. Puma has a much smaller footprint than what we used to use, which was Unicorn. We did a bunch of tests on that. Again, these were deliberate decisions. We don't just change it. We sit down, have discussions, we measure things. We don't have a lot of time to do that, so we have specific periods in which we do this. Once we've decided on something, we stick with it for a while, and we don't come back to it for at least 6 months. We don't make major changes like this. And this allows us to just move forward and make decisions and not worry about this too much, unless there is a major change. So that's something that I think many people can benefit from is this type of approach. We don't have the profit to sit down and do a whole sort of experimental wing of our organization. We don't have the time to do that. When it comes to the actual visualization, so I guess I'll go back here. When it comes to actual visualization, we use a lot of open tools that already exist. We use HighCharts, right? It's free for nonprofit use, and it works really well. They have map components, etc. But that doesn't always work. It's a case-by-case issue. We used to be a mapping organization. In 2009, we started by actually mapping the entire country of Georgia using OpenStreetMap model, which would be interesting for you, I know. But so I can talk maps for a long time. Also, open map data is particularly important to us. And we use OpenStreetMaps quite a lot in all our work, including the boundaries that we use for a variety of issues or streets or etc. So we did used to be a mapping organization, and we switched to a overall data communication organization. And we can see how that bleeds through into the design and communication work that we do. That we couldn't otherwise do without access to the open data. And so one of the things, one of our tenets is open by default. Now, I know I mentioned that we use Adobe Creative Suite, which is proprietary, but when it comes to the data, we don't budge. Everything is open. Just like with the Lari calculator, it's open. We create APIs for our data, or we use GitHub data to share that information with the public. But we use also open data sources in our work, especially when it comes to maps, which we use a lot, right? As journalists, as storytellers, geographic distributions of information is highly important to communicating trends and patterns in society. And so we often fall back to using open map data. Even though we don't do that mapping anymore directly, we still benefit a lot from that knowledge and that expertise, but also from the community itself that we gave so much to, and now we still get so much back from it. So in addition to, we've switched to using a lot of D3 now. Does anyone here know what D3 is, data-driven documents? Okay, so I'll share a little bit about it. I'll actually open this up, d3js.org. It's a JavaScript framework that basically ties data to the DOM, or the document object model for the web. So basically, it allows you to build data-driven web pages, and allows you to do that very elegantly in a very simple manner. So these are a lot of, this is basically industry standard. This is what the New York Times used. It was built by Mike Bostock, who used to work for the New York Times. And basically, it really allows you to just pull data from both local as well as other external sources. And you can do this in real time using Ajax. But it allows you to pull in data and then visualize that data. Now, it's not a chart library, right? It's about data and mapping it to the DOM. And really that really is what we wanted to, what we do a lot. And so when that first started coming out way back in around 2011, 2010, we were very excited about this technology, and we highly recommend and talk about it a lot because, one, it's free, it's open, and there's a vibrant community discussing how to visualize data in a variety of ways. So you don't have to just create everything from scratch. There's a lot of templates and examples you can benefit from. But really, what it does is say, like, this allows our designers to go crazy, right? And very quickly allows us to go from a very custom visualization or representation of data graphically into an interactive or programmed visual web visualization. So data to visual on the web. So it's not charts. You can see here there are a lot of charts, but these are visualizations. They're not just your cookie cutter bar charts and whatnot. You can do that and very simply and very straightforward. But you got to think bigger than that, because the best way to visualize information may not be a simple bar chart. It may be there may be 3 or more variables instead of 2, right? And you may need to visualize that in a different way that is more meaningful for people, that touches their hearts or touches, of course, in this case, the right side of their brain, and then allows them to jump into the data and understand it in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. That basically shows the relationships between different aspects of the data. So we use quite a lot of D3 these days, and I'll show you an example of how that works. So Another web scraping project, we scrape real estate data. We've been scraping it for now 2 years from a number of sources. And we probably have the most definitive, besides the companies themselves that we're scraping from, have probably the most definitive data set of real estate in the country. So much so that banks are now contacting us and collaborating with us on real estate projects because they don't have the data themselves and they never thought to do this. And I don't know why. Maybe they just didn't talk to the right person, but they just didn't do it. But we did it because that's how we think. And so 2 years ago, we didn't even know that we wanted to work on a real estate data, but we know if we, a real estate story, but we knew if we did, we wouldn't be able to tell that story right away because we would need time to collect data over time, not just a snapshot of time. So we actually, in advance, started collecting real estate in preparation for a time when we needed to tell a story in the future about real estate, which might seem weird, but in fact, that's exactly how it worked out. And so well into the lorry devaluation, we started to tell a story about, can you buy a flat? How much does it cost to buy a flat? And really, this is kind of based off the New York Times model of unemployment for people like you, or jobless rate for people like you. We wanted to say, like, the real estate market for people just like you, basically. And so we, I don't know why this is not working. Sorry about the circuitous path to this application. I don't know why when I click on the link it's not working in the setup. But basically, we analyzed that data that we had been collecting for so long. And we wanted to tell the story of what it's like for people to buy a flat. But there are a lot of other parameters, not just real estate data, that come into play. For example, banks, as a rule in Georgia, will not give you a loan for longer than 15 years, no matter what. They just won't do it, which seems weird, right? Mortgages, housing market in Georgia is also really high. Like, it's really expensive. And we don't know why. It seems quite inflated, actually. And we're working on that too. But so for people, like there are a lot of parameters that go into whether or not they can actually afford a place and how much places cost in different regions. But there are trends, and so we capitalized on those trends, and then we were able to visualize and allow people to enter in some personal information about themselves so that they can find out what that means in terms of the real estate market for them personally. And this was a huge hit, but also very depressing for people, just like the lorry depreciation calculator. So, like, imagine, you're looking for a flat. Now, 45 square meters is the average small apartment for maybe one person, and that's still teeny tiny. But that's what also a lot of people were looking for, interestingly enough. And let's say you're putting aside 250 lari. Well, we can see here that the lighter colors are what's more affordable for you, and the darker colors, the darker red, is what's less affordable for you. And so you can see it geographically, but you can also see here. And you see, it would take you 30 years and 4 months to save up the amount of money on average for a flat. Unfortunately, because it's over 15 years, we wrote a message to the user saying, unfortunately, you're screwed, basically. You can't buy a house. And it's a very common thing because the parameters that enable people to buy a house need to be quite low. For example, the very low area, square meters, but also you need to be willing to shell out a lot of money per month, but most people don't make that much money, and then enough to keep the loan under 15 years. So we built this using D3. But you can see a lot of work went into this. Web scraper technology, so all done in Ruby. Database, let's say Postgres database for data storage and also analysis. And then data analysis, we might use something like R. After we export the data, basic queries into, let's say, CSV files or whatnot, we might go into using R, which is a statistical packaging software that's free and open source, to analyze that data using different methods or models. And then that can tell us what the story is telling us, like from geographical distributions to other types of things. And finally, once we've decided on the story itself, once we see the trends in the data, what the data is telling us, we then mock up the story itself, and then we visualize that using, let's say in this case, D3, which is, again, one of the technologies we use a lot. D3 is very flexible because it's very simple. One of the reasons why we like it so much is because it uses the web the way the web is. It's not like a new framework or a new type of approach to graphic representation. It uses the core fundamental web technologies, CSS, HTML, SVG, and JavaScript. And it just uses those. And if you can wrap your head around those technologies and you can draw out a design that you think is a good way to communicate, then D3 can allow you to build that design very quickly, to draw that design on the web using the data in a very beautiful way with some CSS stylings. So you don't have to learn a whole new graphical language to communicate the data itself, which is really good. Not unlike some other tools like Raphael or whatnot that have their own sort of graphical representation environment or language that they use to do that. This is web-based, and it's very in many ways, it's a framework, but it's very simple. It allows you to work also quite quickly. So I can go on and on with other examples. There are a lot of, if you're interested, you can always go back and check out Peradi Info. Peradi in Georgian means in color or colorful, .info, so colorful information. That's kind of what we believe in. Information that people want to read, not information that is vomited onto a page that nobody wants to read. But these are some of the core technologies that we use to tell stories, though. And it's a very different environment than you would find, let's say, in like Gigi Taxi that has a very complex architecture, but their purpose is very different and their time scales are very different. We're a very fast-paced organization. We have to build things very quickly and get them out the door so that they can matter for communications goals. So it's all about communication, and if it doesn't, if you can't communicate it, then all that technology is for nothing, right? In the end, it's for nothing. So, like I said, we are considering moving to Node for basically almost a full JavaScript stack environment to work on. But we're researching that. We're not going to just jump into it, but we think that might be a good approach for us, and we're going to continue to do that. Also, depending on the data and the way that we need to represent or analyze that data, we use different databases too. We also build tools like Extractor, which I talked about yesterday, to help people visualize tools. We're kind of selfish because we built this for us in many ways, so that we can encourage people to share their data more, so we would have more material to work with, so we could tell better stories. So we're encouraging people to upload data sets. This is actually one of our more complicated tools that we've built. It is open source though. It's built using Rails, MongoDB in the background, because we never know what we're going to get. So it's a very flexible type of database. And the visuals, we use high charts because we want to enable, because it has a built-in API for exporting the graphics in a variety of formats, and we didn't have to reinvent that wheel. So we often use high charts for those types of purposes. And it's been very popular, so popular that UNICEF wanted their own version for their data. and we worked with UNICEF to actually get all their survey data online and accessible for free for everyone, and which is a core tenet of what our work is about. Is people can do amazing things with data, but they need the data, right? And there's a lot of data out there, and people need to know about it. And so that's kind of what that's about. But in addition, we also we focus on stories. And here's another tool that we built that's being used all around the world, which is really cool. We never expected that. It was quite a surprise for us. And we're like, what? We kind of had a oh crap moment where we built this tool for us to do a story for one of our partner organizations on IDPs, internally displaced people. And then other people started using it, and then journalism schools picked it up as a tool to train journalists in mixed media storytelling. And so I can give you an example of one thing that we did. Let's see if we can. So it is mixed media. It allows people to build interactive multimedia stories that have audio soundtracks. It's probably still loading because the internet's slow. But it allows you to build these sort of New York Times style flowing, scrolling stories. It's really actually D3 under the hood, but with a Ruby on Rails wrapper that allows people to build the stories so they don't have to code to do it. And interestingly enough, so people all over the world are doing this. This is in more than 15 different languages, and people are just building the stories because it's easy. They don't need to know how to do anything. They can just build it. And so now there's so much media content we're having to explore using Amazon S3 or other media storage services and to build that into it because our server is about to run out of space. But one cool thing was that 2 weeks ago, we were working with Azerbaijani media outlet to tell a story about the Formula One race that's happening right now in Baku. And the idea was to communicate that there's a lot of corruption behind this Formula One race. Let's see if I can find it real quick and show you. We had to do this very quickly, right? So here it is. Yes, I'm in Armenia, talking about a story by an Azerbaijani media outlet about corruption in Baku, but such is life. So we used Story Builder to build this, and basically what was cool about it was that it enabled us, for them to use Story Builder as a content management system to build the story, and we just created a custom template for them, which Story Builder can do. We just never had the time to actually enable people to log in and do that themselves. But we can build any templating system we want for Story Builder, and so we did just that. Let's see if it's loaded. And so basically it has some maps, but the resolution here is not wide enough to show the other map. Okay. But basically the other map, it has a map that allows you to, as you scroll down through the different stories of corruption, it's on the left side, and it follows the path of the actual track that Formula One race cars are driving in the center of Baku. And what was interesting is that we did this in about a week from design to implementation, and then allowed them to use Story Builder to actually build it while we were designing it so we could save time. And then we published it because you can export all the stories here. They're not locked in. It's not like some third-party platform that hosts your data for you. No, Story Builder itself is also open source. You can set up your own Story Builder if you want, but every story you build in Story Builder can be exported in its raw files, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and media assets, right? So it liberates your data. It doesn't allow, not like Medium, right? Medium is a cool platform, don't get me wrong, I like it. But as a journalist, you don't want to ensure that your data and your media is locked inside some third-party application that ultimately, what happens if they go out of business? Or what happens if they put up a paywall and force you to start paying? You don't know. So we want the tools to be free and open and allow journalists and storytellers to use it without the fear that one day their data is just going to disappear. That's not what we want. But anyways, what was cool about this is back out. What was cool about this is they published it. It was hugely popular. It was one of their best stories, and visually probably was their best story they'd ever done. And it was picked up by foreign media, though, which was important. So, like, the production value and the design actually was, you know, was a huge bonus for them, a huge benefit, because then it was picked up by Foreign Policy, which is a very popular international publication, and Washington Post, and other people mentioned it, and it's probably one of their most popular stories to date, and it just went live last week, and already it's just like exploded. So like we couldn't have done that we could have done it by hand if we didn't have that, but if we didn't have Story Builder already in place. But one thing that Story Builder did allow us to do that we couldn't have done is enable them to build the story as we were building the template separately. So they just used the normal template to build the story with all the stories and media assets and everything else. And then we just, when we were done with designing and coding the template, the new template, we just added it to their story, and poof, it was done. So we could do two things at once: allow them to work and do their job, but allow us to do the custom visualizations that we needed to do for them. So that's it. You know, we use, again, you know, I hopefully give you a sense of how technology can be used in a different environment than what I think a lot of people are talking about here. But you know, how we can use technology to tell stories, and how we can use technology to tell stories very efficiently, very fast, and in a cost-effective manner, so that we can continue to do this important work and work with partners at a price that they can afford, because the work is really important, we think, and it's important that somebody does this in a way that these stories get told, and that people start to discuss these stories in the public discourse. So, any questions?
The map doesn't work. You wanted to show the map.
The resolution. So it forced it to go into mobile mode. I don't know. Maybe I can. There. I mean, now you can see it on the left. I shrank the screen. So. I mean, as you go down, it is a really long story, which we tried to you know, but you can see the map starts to follow them. This was actually inspired by a New York Times article about a story in Russia, from Moscow to this village, and they did a very similar approach. And it just kind of came to mind that this is sometimes a good way to tell a story is a good way to tell a story, and there's no harm in copying a good way to tell a story, because there's only so many ways you can tell a story that actually touches people. So we have no shame in picking something up that works. That's part of the process. And like anything is original these days that often, so it's not that big a deal. But there it is.
Your site's name is?
What's that?
Website?
Which one?
The one
Peradi Info.
Peradi Info?
FERADI.info. Peradi Info. Yeah. Dot info. Yeah. Yeah.
Can we jump on the map?
Yeah, the map is also a menu. Yeah. Which makes sense, right? And there's a lot of stories on Peradi you can check out that are based in data, and some are fun and whimsical, and some are not so fun, quite sad, or just very, angering. But they're all good stories. They're all grounded in data, and they all use some form of technology to build them. So if you have any questions, I'll be around. Just let me know. Thank you.